Welcome to the Tuesday, October 6th, noon session for the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. We're really lucky today that we have four of the leading people in the field of planning, architecture, doing work in Hawaii and Oceania. It's a panel that's looking at planning for Hawaii 2.0. You know, where do we go forward from here, given the COVID crisis? Our first speaker today is Luciano Minerbi. Luciano is Professor Emeritus of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Hawaii, Mānoa. He specializes in land use, environment, cultural assessment, community development, and sustainability in Hawaii and Oceania.
I would like to make 4 points today. One, that how can we look at the future in a sustainable optic? Second, what was wrong with planning in Hawaii, particularly on Oahu, that we have to change? Third, what was not done in the past, and a suggestion to move forward at the county level and the state level. One problem is that is usually proposed that to engage in a sustainable future, we just have to engage in the trade-off between the economy, society, and the environment. The pitfall of this major definition that is adopted by everyone, I think even by the state, is that it's just a question of trade-offs. This instead is wrong because the environment, the ecology, the ecosystem is the one that sustains society and the economy. So society has to change, the economy has to change, and has to respect the environment. Also, definition of sustainability, even the international level, are very simplistic. Sustainability, if you can see the screen, is a very complex idea. It has 3 dimensions. Sustainability in terms of even a philosophy, a religion, a new paradigm, and also a concept of eco-development, which means designing cities to emulate a natural system, not going against natural system. And finally, there is a specific method and techniques for the sustainable utilization of resources or not renewable. So in conclusion, to move forward, we have to be sure that this complex approach to sustainability is considered. The way forward would be to really do neighborhood planning, to really implement a community benefit agreement so community can negotiate with bigger government and bigger business for the project that come in that should benefit them. Embrace totally the concept of eco-settlement and ecosystem, and look at the biophysical environment in real terms when we plan our city. Implement urban infill with all the tools that would allow the monitoring of a sustainable city that utilize the concept of urban metabolism and industrial ecology.
Thank you, Luciano. That was great. Our next speaker is Mary Alice Evans. Mary Alice is the director for the Hawaii State Office of Planning. She serves as a co-chair of the Transit-Oriented Development Council and the State Climate Change Mitigation Adaptation Commission, and as chair of the Greenhouse Gas Sequestration Task Force. She's been a state employee for over 40 years, starting as a student intern and serving in 4 different departments. That's amazing. She received her BA degree in sociology from University of California at Santa Barbara and an MA degree from the Urban Regional Planning group at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa.
We are now learning how to communicate and get planning input from residents in order to find a way forward to deal with the economic disaster that the COVID-19 has imposed on our families and businesses. My last slide is where I think Planning 2.0 is going now, and it's an interesting change for planning. One more slide. Whoops, yeah. And that is, for the first time in Hawaii's history, we've had a decline in population of more than 1 year. We've now had 3 years of a decline in our working age population, and that has serious impacts that planners have to consider. They have to look at the fact that that leaves state and county government with fewer workers supplying fewer resources to support public education, public health, public safety, public housing, bond funding for public infrastructure, and protection of natural resources. Planners are going to need to, once again, adapt to a new paradigm, and that it was one that the Office of Planning has been embracing. We have been working on a program of transit-oriented development, housing. I think Dr. Garbowden will speak to the necessity for that, the supporting renewable energy to replace our fossil fuel, and renewable energy that is indigenous to Hawaii, so we're not having to import the source of energy, and increasing our local food production. The goal here is to try to keep people from moving out in the working age populations by making sure that the cost of living drivers that force families to move to the mainland are not as burdensome as they currently are. So that's the challenge for planners. We will be looking for as much input as possible to help address these. And thank you all for listening to our thoughts on this.
Mary Alice, thank you. That was great. Really enjoyed that. Our next speaker up is Kathy Hoshar, who's an assistant professor at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa School of Architecture, and the inaugural director of the University of Hawaii Community Design Center, where she focuses on public sector, public interest teaching and practice. She has 17 years of professional practice experience in Honolulu and degrees from Stanford University and UC Berkeley, one of my favorite schools.
So COVID-19 has forced us to retool our spatial behaviors. And what I'm truly interested in is how this forces us to rethink our space standards and our code minimums. So the 1832 cholera outbreak led to housing regulations that introduced requirements for private bathrooms and dwellings, for fire escapes, maximum densities, and direct ventilation for sleeping rooms. A positive outcome of this was improved sanitation in our cities. And so here we are, almost 200 years later, finding ourselves now adjusting to an airborne virus versus a waterborne disease. The transmission of this virus through particles in the air have created a whole new way that we perceive our spaces. According to an AIA tool for reoccupying spaces, these physical distancing practices require 100 square feet per person, which is roughly the size of a small bedroom, which impacts all of the other existing means that we calculate our minimum occupancies. So our new reality questions whether people really have a right to more space or open air spaces, for example, a lanai in an affordable or public housing project or correctional facility where space is typically at a minimum. So now we have our classrooms originally sized for 19 people can only hold 8, or about 40% of the original room's occupancy. This is a new space planning challenge for all of us. But on the upside, we've developed effective ways of teaching, or we think we're being effective, that don't require classrooms. With regard to building vertically, talking about density, studies are showing that there can be airflow from lower floors to upper floors between windows with a flush facade. 7% of the room air can contain exhaust air from a room below, which means that window ledges and sunshades may do more than just mitigate heat, that they might be actually critical to mitigating the re-entry of air. And the pandemic may even shape the way buildings look in the future. As much of COVID's transmission has occurred in indoor spaces, there may be changes made to the requirements of our HVAC systems to address infectious aerosols in general. And this is not specific to COVID-19. ASHRAE recommended enhanced filtration MERV filters that are over code minimums in high-risk spaces. And they're also recommending, in-room fans, local exhaust ventilation, portable HEPA filters, other things that are not required by code right now. And in Hawaii, we have the great opportunity to make use of our temperate climate. So we're the perfect space to pilot an expanded use of outdoor spaces, external circulation, lanais, natural ventilation, which only supports our goals for more energy efficient buildings. So public space. Our public space was temporarily transformed, actually positively in many places. Our reduced need for cars offers exciting pilots for long-term transformation. In addition to the parking lots that became shelters, our streets were given back to people for walking, jogging, rolling, biking, and leisure.
Our final speaker for today is Phil Garbowden. Phil is the endowed HCRC professor in affordable housing economics, policy, and planning at the University of Hawaii at Mānoa. He comes to us from Johns Hopkins University, and he's a member of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Mānoa, and also the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. I do want to note that Phil has published extensively on the impact of COVID on Hawaii's labor markets and housing markets.
Sort of taking a step out, whether you're talking about filling a room for collaborative planning, whether you're talking about getting a program out to needy people, whether you're talking about collecting data for a survey, there are groups of people that are almost always underrepresented, right? And there's lots of empirical, evidence of this, but it's also, I think, all pretty straightforward, right? From my perspective, when we're talking about housing, one of the hardest groups to collect data from are the people who are suffering from the housing crisis the most, which is the homeless, right? They don't have mailing addresses, they don't have phones, they have other things going on in their lives other than participating in our research and everything. Non-English speakers, undocumented individuals, people with liminal documentation status, or people who believe their documentation status to be liminal, like COFA applicants, disabled folks. Here, obviously, this coalesces around a routine and repetitive underrepresentation of Hawaiians and Micronesian families in most of our data and planning processes. Depending on how you're collecting data or how you're getting people to show up for what type of event, you're almost invariably either going to have too many old people or too many young people. Getting both right is a real challenge, right? You call people on the phone and all of a sudden no young people answer it. You send people an online survey and all of a sudden no old people answer it, right? You advertise your planning process through the newspaper, you tend to get older people. You advertise your planning process on TikTok, you get younger people, getting that balance right. And then finally, and this is really the most important thing, is that you're always not going to get the kinds of people who couldn't care less about your foolishness, right? Whether your foolishness is some planning process you're implementing, some new program, or some research you're doing, you're always going to have a group of people who simply don't care about helping. But that doesn't mean those people don't suffer the consequences of the decision, for both better or worse, right? So even if you're able to show balance on what we would call observables, the unobservable factor of people who are less motivated to participate in whatever you're doing, you can't look that up. You can't say 30% of people in Hawaii are not motivated to do surveys, but those people are not random. Those people are systematically different from the people who do participate. So, there's one answer to this, right? Which is that why don't we just do a well-powered randomized address level sampling with an 80% response rate, right? This is the gold standard kind of methodology. If you get 80% of the population, you generally assume that there isn't much bias in who you got. If you do address level sampling, you don't have any problems with communication technology, since most people live somewhere. And if you're smart about it, you can capture homeless people in that as well. And my answer to this is that we absolutely should be doing this. And indeed, we're sort of trying to plan to develop the infrastructure to do this kind of thing. But it takes a lot of money and advanced planning, neither of which we had during COVID.
You know, one of the things that I've been trying to point out as one of the silver linings of the COVID crisis, there's not necessarily that many, but I think this is one, is the reduced traffic in Honolulu, is the fact that people can actually move around the city, and that the reduced traffic has brought quite a few benefits, even though, again, part of that is because of self-enforced stay-at-home orders or closure of businesses and schools. But it is interesting to observe the city when it has less traffic. I looked very interestingly on the Oakland Slow Streets scheme, where they were trying to make more streets available for alternative uses. And here we talk about the lack of outdoor restaurants in some ways. I mean, for a city that has such good weather all year round, we have a remarkably small number of outdoor restaurants, I think. For that, do you all see opportunities? Do you all see any opportunities coming forth from this? Just from the reduction in traffic and maybe some alternative uses of streets. Kathy, let me start with you, since this is a little more up your area there when you're talking about the slow streets.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I put it in my slide, was because I think this was a great proof of concept, and it was installed and it was lived, and it makes it easier to carry out policies, you know, zoning changes that would support that long term. Absolutely, we need more functional outdoor space in Hawaii that's usable for public gathering, leisure, recreation, all of that.
Right. Okay.
Well, since you talk about transportation, even more than this kind of issues of traffic, the food hub, the people's market, they bringing the food that is grown in the countryside to the people in need in those neighborhoods you identified. This is what COVID revealed to us. These people already talk about it, but now they became a reality. They've been feeding more than what the system that closed down did. Okay. And that's what I meant. There is different circuit of capital for different income level and urban and rural level on the population. So the food hub is a great example of how we have to do more partial regional closure, like Store advocated, to capitalize with the island resources we have and exploit what we can do in serving the Pacific Island people. We have a tremendous opportunity to export an intelligent industry of providing services to the archipelago in the Pacific. Okay. Forget conventional tourists of Waikiki.
Okay. I just want to close here by noting that, you know, this notion of declining population, it may be that even when the economy comes back, that we're not able to restore tourism to the full 10 million, that may not be such a bad thing. We may find declining population is more something that we need to think about, not just as a temporary phenomenon, but a possible reality over the next few years. I want to thank everybody for these really nice presentations. It was a great forum. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's cooperation.